So my monologue will be rather later than normal because I can't keep my next guest waiting, because he'd then be keeping a very large audience waiting in the theatre he is about to perform on. But I'm not here to talk to Jim Davidson about comedy, although he's an extremely funny man. I'm here to talk to him about his work with Care After Combat. He's the Chief Executive Officer. He is still in show business, of course, but he puts in more and more time trying to pick up the pieces of broken lives of service personnel sent into the field, often ill-clad, ill-armed, ill-prepared, on ill-conceived wars. At least that's my point of view. It's not necessarily his. Jim, thanks for squeezing us in.
Hello, George. Always a pleasure to talk, to be on the mother of all talk shows with the father of all politicians.
Thank you so much, Jim. Now, they'll all be there on Sunday, waxen-faced, including those who sent many a serviceman to die in the manner I've just been describing, some of them even planning the next wars that they're going to send the next service personnel to. Meanwhile, 13,000 ex-service personnel are homeless in Britain. And as you well know, because of your work at Care After Combat, there are more than enough of them in jail and suffering mental health problems. And yet, hundreds of millions are raised every year, Jim. Is it being spent right?
Well, it's rather baffling. And you're right. We have 3,500 veterans in prison that Care After Combat are dealing with. And we're doing well, thank heavens. We're reducing reoffending from 45% in the general population down to 8%. But you can't help noticing, George, that these people are suffering terribly. There is a chap, as we speak, up outside Combat Stress's place in Shropshire, who I'm going to see tomorrow. He's been on hunger strike for 13 days now, and he is just fed up with the treatment. I think the government have to do more. I think they are trying to do more. They've sent me, for one thing. You know, they asked us to put together Care After Combat to reduce reoffending. But one must ask, where is all the money going that has been raised, George? It's a very good point you bring up.
Well, I've looked at it, Jim, and a lot of it's sitting in the bank. And I just do not understand how that can be justified. That people like the British Legion, though not only them, are sitting on monumental reserves and bank balances, whilst there's service personnel on the street.
I think that the last count, there was about £500 million in charity bank accounts. And they are all doing, I imagine, what they do with it. If you add the amount of money we got, it's £500 million and 20 grand. Tonight, I will chip in £1,000 for every concert I do. £1,000 goes into keeping Care After Combat afloat, because if we don't keep going, these boys are going to suffer. The good news on the horizon is that for the last 18 months, we've partnered up with the NHS. And so now, as we're offering a mentoring service, we're offering a well-being and treatment for mental illness, PTSD. That's with the guys that are in prison. I think there's a lot more got to be done, George.
Well, our production team are looking into this at the moment, and I'll be reading out the numbers of the bank balances later. And
well, I can tell you ours, it's about £30,000 as we speak.
Yeah, yours is, yeah.
£31,000
But there's £500 million out there. And I just cannot understand how people could be homeless when there's £500 million in charity accounts, never mind the money that the government should be ponying up. After all, they send these soldiers off to war with straw hats and trumpets. They tell us that they will never forget the sacrifice being made, but they very promptly do, Jim.
Well, you know, there's a lot of problems that the veteran faces. People say, they just sum it up by saying it's PTSD. But there's more to it than that, George. There's mental health, anxiety, you know, poverty. I mean, it's a nightmare. People find it hard. What we've got to really look at, though, is that 99% of veterans transitioning from the military to civilian life have no problem at all. But it's very, very important that we look at the 1%. I think the government are willing to do more, but it's 2 steps forward and 3 steps back at the moment. I think everyone's pulling together. How much money will be raised by the Poppies for the British Legion? I hope it's millions and millions, and I hope they spend it wisely. They're a fabulous charity. let them perhaps look at some of the other charities that are doing specific jobs and maybe share it out a bit. Let's all get together and try and help these guys get back to a normal life, George.
Well, we tried to get the British Legion on. They were unable to accept our invitation because I myself put 20 quid in the box, which I always do. I don't take the poppy anymore for political reasons, which we'll go into on another occasion. But I paid my dues, and I want to know why, having done so, and a lot of other people doing so, even more money than that, I want to know why there's service personnel living on the street and broken service personnel in the jails that you're having to put back together.
Sure. I mean, the other thing is about wearing the poppy. I'm not one of these poppy police that said George Galloway's not wearing a poppy. I know what you think about the soldiers, George. You look at it the way I do. It's not a political thing. It's for men and women that have to suffer. And some of our veterans are still fighting for their lives. And I think the government need to move a little quicker, get behind some of the smaller charities. I know they're trying their best, but they just need to try a little harder and get some sustained funding. We need stable funding for these unstable men. And we'll get them back, George.
My two grandfathers fought.
Mate, I tell you that.
My two grandfathers fought in the desert in the 8th Army for freedom, and they fought for the freedom of people in this country to speak and act as they like within the law. Jim Davidson, break a leg on stage tonight, and many thanks for squeezing us in before your show.
Speaking to you.
Thanks, yes. You tell him. You were on the mother of all talk shows. Jim Davidson, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, as Jim volunteered there, I didn't ask him. He volunteered there that he's not one of these poppy police. But poppy police are proliferating, if you'll forgive the alliteration. They are proliferating everywhere, and not least in the media houses where journalists, I think they call themselves, march people with a drumbeat of propaganda into war after war after war. You can't go on the BBC without the mandatory poppy. Well, I'm not wearing one this evening at Talk Radio because that's my right. It was also my right to make a donation in lieu of wearing the poppy. Where do you stand on poppies? 0344 499 1000. That's the number to call. 0344 499 1000. You call us, we'll call you back, put you on the radio. Needn't cost you more than a penny or two. You can email me through the website at talkradio.co.uk. You can text me. Text the word talk and then your message to 87222, though that will cost you 25 pence plus normal sending charges. But you can tweet me for free at George Galloway at Talk Radio. Maybe you'll have to re-follow me because in the blink of an eye, and while I was looking at it, more than 1,500 of my followers just disappeared earlier this evening, just as I was closing in on 300,000. Somebody asked me why I'm obsessed by numbers. I'm not. Call it perverse. I just want my messages to reach the largest number of people possible. So it's at George Galloway at Talk Radio. We'll be talking to John Wight, writer and commentator, though that's like saying that Ronaldo is a footballer. John Wight is the best left-wing writer in Britain, maybe in the whole of the English-speaking world, and his piece on poppies, on remembrance, on war this week was the best that I read anywhere by a country mile. And as I said at the beginning, waxen-faced they'll be on Sunday. One of them will be Tony Blair. Can you believe that? One of them will be Tony Blair, waxen-faced with grief, wearing an ever larger poppy that is worn for ever longer. And yet, no man in recent history has sent more soldiers into peril, and some to their deaths, many more to their permanent injury, many more to the mental scars that Jim Davidson was just talking about. He'll be there, but it won't stop him being on the television on Monday, pushing for more war elsewhere. Hypocrites. as Robert Burns put it. Ye hypocrites, are these your pranks, to murder men and gie God thanks? Halt, desist, go nae further. God'll no accept your thanks for murder. 0344 499 1000. That's the number to call me. You call, we'll call you back. Needn't cost you more than a penny or two. Above all, I need your calls, but your emails, your texts, and your tweets are also very welcome. And if you disagree with me, your point of view will be prioritised, whether that's on the phone or in writing. John Wight, superb writer, commentator, has this week surpassed even his own high standards with what he wrote on the imminent Remembrance Sunday. And he joins me now on the show. John Wight, thanks for joining us.
Hi, George. Thanks for having me.
Welcome. Just summarise, if you will, and tell the people where they can read the piece that you wrote that I referred to. Would you summarise your case in that?
Well, the piece appeared on the Medium platform. I wrote it 2 days ago. And it was in response to a time of year when we are invited to enter the bubble of unreality in which the nation's establishment exists when it comes to the rendering of the country's legacy of wars, unending wars since the First World War, that have marked the country's history. We are meant to abrogate our critical faculties under huge and ceaseless moral pressure, with the inference that if we dare to dissent at this time of year, then we are somehow tarnishing the memory of the brave men who gave their lives in the country's wars. And it's actually to the contrary, because if we follow this narrative and if we join this ruling class circus and theatre, which will be held on Sunday in front of the Cenotaph, then we are precipitating further wars. We are failing to hold those responsible for those wars to proper account. You mentioned Tony Blair earlier on, and that is the glaring example. We had the vilification, righteous vilification of these reprobates in South London who burned the effigy of Grenfell Tower recently. And yet here's Tony Blair and David Cameron, still regarded as respected members of the establishment, who burned countries, and yet they will be front and centre behind the Cenotaph, spouting pious platitudes and homilies about the troops and our nation's troops at the same time as 13,000 of them are sitting on the streets, suffering a living hell, dealing with mental illness as a consequence of their service in this country's war, sent there by the likes of Tony Blair, and also penury and grievous austerity. It really is a time for everyone to speak out and to resist this ruling class hypocrisy. It is an annual ritual of nauseating hypocrisy.
Well, say what you mean, John. That was a very powerful homily, I must say. Now, let me try and break it down. On Sunday, it will mark the centenary, literally the centenary of the end of the First World War. I'm one of these that believes that the First World War was the greatest crime that the British ruling elite ever perpetrated against its own people. And the First World War was the greatest crime that the crowned heads of Europe, who were all cousins, by the way, who could have sorted any arguments they had out round the Christmas dinner table at Sandringham, was the greatest crime they ever carried out against their own people. Therefore, I have nothing but sympathy, but grief, but pathos for the slaughter, the charnel house that was the First World War, an unimaginable abattoir of human beings. But I will not march behind Tony Blair and David Cameron in any parade. Is that roughly where you stand?
Well, the issue that you've just described boils down to class. It's the issue of class. It's their class versus our class. The great German communist Karl Liebknecht said it best. He resisted the First World War. He resisted German militarism. And as you know, at the time, most of the left across Europe fell into line behind the respective ruling classes and joined the flag waving as the troops marched off to their slaughter. But Karl Liebknecht said it best. He held the line. He said that the main enemy is at home. 'Twas ever thus, and ever thus shall be. And I am saying clearly that the main enemy of the 13,000 of our veterans who are homeless right now, I befriended one recently, his story is utterly heartrending. The main enemy of those people, the only enemy of those people, are not the Afghans and the Iraqis that they were sent to kill in their countries, on a lie, but the people who will be standing front and centre in front of the cenotaph on Sunday. We can never, ever allow them to get away with forging this false consciousness about who and whose interests these wars are being fought. They're not fought in our interest. And you mentioned the First World War. The First World War presaged the Second World War, George. It laid the ground for the Second World War in terms of the savage terms that were inflicted on Germany after the war in the Treaty of Versailles, which was the grievance of which Hitler fed to build his Nazi fascist movement, and along with, of course, the Depression years, and also the appeasement that this ruling class was responsible for, which allowed Hitler to proceed to a point where he unleashed hell across Europe, even worse than the First World War. He could have been stopped much earlier in his tracks if this ruling class had not appeased him. A lot of the reasons for that appeasement, George, was latent sympathy for Hitler that existed among a large section of the ruling class, a larger section of the ruling class than the official history allows. So we have to understand the reality, and we have to push back against this unreality that's forged on Remembrance Day.
And as you've just implied, we're not against, are we, all wars? In fact, we believe that we should have fought Hitler earlier. We should have fought him when he started. We should have fought him in Spain. We should have fought him over Czechoslovakia. We should have fought the Nazi war machine when it would have been much easier to defeat.
Well, it was the working class, as you know, in East London who did hold the line against fascism in this country in 1936 at the Battle of Cable Street. And I believe that stiffened the spine of the country's ruling elite at that time, who were moving towards sympathy, who wanted to come to terms with Hitler. Of course, Churchill played an indispensable role. He had his own reasons. He wanted to preserve the empire. But be that said, that this was a point in history when the interests of the working class people, the working people of this country, and the ruling elite, or that section of the ruling class, behind Churchill, coalesced. That was a necessary war. But again, now the reason for that war was because of the mishandling of the end of the First World War. You're right, the First World War set the stage for the Second World War. But since the Second World War, we've had an almost unending pattern of war after war after war. Most of them fought not for reasons of security, none of them, I would argue, but for reasons of maintaining the privileges on which the ruling class enjoys at the expense of those that they send to fight in those wars. And the ancient Greek Herodotus said it best: war violates the order of nature. In peacetime, sons bury fathers. In war, fathers bury sons. And that is what we need to push back against. In 2018 is utterly contemptible that this glorifying of British militarism, because that's what Remembrance Day is. Not everyone who will obey the silence will be of that view. Of course not. And I would never suggest that. But this ruling class pageantry is about trying to forge this false consciousness that Britain's role in the world is essentially positive. It's a beacon of human rights and civility, civilization and democracy. And I think the reality is anything but.
Now, finally, as I've just been talking to Jim Davidson of Care After Combat, 4,500 ex-servicemen are in the prison system, many of them damaged mentally, psychologically, and 13,000, as you said, are living on the cold streets. Funnily enough, I just befriended one too. Great minds think alike. We were both lucky to have met in the last week or so an ex-serviceman living on the street. That's a big contrast, isn't it? Hundreds of millions are raised, and in fact, $500 million in the bank of the collected military charities, whilst military personnel are actually at this cold night bedding down in shop doorways. How could that possibly be?
It's contempt. It's illustrative of the unalloyed contempt in which these people really do hold the troops. They use them for their own purposes. The fact that the chief executive and the other executives of the Royal British Legion are on six-figure salaries. The Royal British Legion itself is sitting on a mountain of cash at a time when a disproportionate number of veterans are not only homeless but are among the suicides, are in prison, are offenders, suffering mental illness, lack the care that they deserve and need in order to try and return to a semblance of normality. The Invictus Games is set up for military veterans who have come out of their service with injuries, life-altering injuries, sponsored by arms companies that are currently selling weapons to the Saudis to slaughter Yemeni children. I mean, it goes on and on and on and on. And as Bertolt Brecht rightly said, the crimes pile up, they become invisible. And this is the invisibility that we must expose at this time of year because, as I said earlier, the issue is first and for always the issue of class.
John Wight, thank you very much indeed for a powerful contribution. If you disagree with it, your call will be prioritised. 0344 499 1000. I repeat again that we invited the Royal British Legion to come on the show tonight. They haven't got back to us, but it's not too late. If there's anyone listening from the Legion, we'd love to hear from you. 0344 499 1000. Or email me, text me, or tweet me at George Galloway at Talk Radio, as Stephanie has, saying it is an enduring mystery to me why people on Twitter choose to follow people that they detest so much. It's like a sort of strange masochism. Let me move on. No, it's not allowing me to move on. We've got the gremlins again. Russell says Remembrance Day produces the same phony act from politicians, suited in black, spewing void words of sadness and sorrow until the next war. If they possessed a microbe of sincerity, they would do everything to prevent wars. But if on our after the battle, soldiers deserve the best. Thanks, Russell. Tony X, my old pal, says Jim Davidson is a brilliant ambassador for veterans. Love him or loathe him. He speaks from the heart. Thanks for bringing him on early. Thank you, Tony. And Terry Eaton says, George, I believe that the people who send our troops to war don't care about them when they return. This is because, in the main, they are working class and do not count in the eyes of the establishment. God forgive them. And Lizzie, the legend, says, not sure Jim Davidson is able to speak freely either. In 2015, David Cameron came off a TV hustings saying, why should the state support veterans? That's what the Poppy Legion are for. Nothing seems to have changed. And Simon Bartle says, I'll be wearing a red poppy to remember all who lost and or gave their lives for our freedom. The fact that they are civilian or military to me, at least, is not relevant. The importance of my remembering them is, however. And Chris says, I'm anti-interventionist wars, but I'm pro-poppy. I wear the poppy as I simply regard it as a symbol of showing respect for those who gave their lives in these terrible conflicts. And Ryan says, another Johnson resigns from May's government. This austerity-enabling, universal credit-supporting, DUP-bribing cabal are beginning to resemble Monty Python's Black Knight. Labour must vote down the Brexit deal. A general election is the only people's vote we need. I'll have much more to say on that after this. A busy show tonight, 0344 499 1000. That's the number to call to get your point of view across. If it disagrees with me, it will be prioritised. Now, I'm very glad to say that Alex Owen, head of Armed Forces Engagement, a section, I think, of the British Legion, I hope was listening in to the show and has called in. If so, I'm particularly glad, Alex, to welcome you.
Hi, George.
Hi. We did try to get a spokesman on for the Legion. I'm really glad that you are, at least in part, able to represent them. Tell us, first of all, to be fair, what it is that you are doing this year, you do every year. What sort of support are you getting? And I think a lot of our listeners want to know what's happening to the money that's raised.
Of course, George. I mean, it's a really special year. Clearly, it's the armistice centenary year for the First World War. And we at the Royal British Legion are trying to get the nation to spend a bit of time, spend a bit of effort in thanking the generation that served, sacrificed and changed our world 100 years ago. So that's not just those that fell on the front of Europe, Mesopotamia and elsewhere around the world, but also those that came back and rebuild their lives. 80% of soldiers came back to rebuild their lives and rebuild the society after the First World War. But also, again, those that remained on the home front, supporting the war effort, whether that be the women that worked in the munitions factories, the children that took up the jobs that the men left behind, and also the pioneers that made incredible inventions during the war that still benefit society today. And of course, we can't forget the Commonwealth. The huge contribution of the Commonwealth to the First World War needs to be noted. And we're basically just going and getting the nation to say thank you to the generation that served 100 years ago.
Well, we highlighted just the other week, actually, that there were literally millions of Commonwealth soldiers fighting with the British on the British side in the First World War. That has been, I would argue, airbrushed out of the official narrative in previous years, at least.
I think perhaps in previous years it hasn't had the attention that it ought to. I hope that this year it has. I mean, I've seen some amazing examples of how communities that have been less represented in Remembrance have been getting behind it. I think it was last weekend in Trafalgar Square, the Diwali event. There was a really decent amount of Remembrance activity around that. If you looked at the Poppy Appeal launch a few weeks ago, you would have noted that some of the strands from the main installation that we had in Greenwich went to significant Commonwealth places, such as Brighton Pavilion, where
I saw that, yes.
Tens of thousands of Indian Army troops convalesced when they came back from the front, and that's where Sikhs, Hindus, Muslims were healed side by side, and a wonderful thing happened there. Another example, the African and Caribbean War Memorial in Brixton. We drew attention to that, and there are some really good examples of how we are trying to incorporate the Commonwealth into Remembrance and making sure that their contribution is noted.
Well, thank you for that, Alex. A lot of people are asking, how come we've got 13,000 ex-army people living on the streets in Britain? How come we've got 4,500 that Jim Davidson's Care After Combat are trying to put back together in the prison system? How come we've got so many ex-army, ex-military personnel in the mental health system and so on, when huge sums of money are being raised and, if I may say so, a lot of them kept in reserve in bank accounts?
So, George, I can't comment on the statistics and the sources that you're citing there. What I do know is that the Legion and other charities are, as you said, with public consent, raising great deals of money. Where that money goes, I can tell you, because there are some incredible things that are happening across both the Legion and elsewhere, from care homes for our elderly, our Second World War veterans, career veterans, special independent living services for them, all the way through to, here near me in London, there's the Centre for Blast Injury Studies at the Imperial College London, where the Royal British Legion has funded that, and they're doing amazing work to research how to prevent servicemen from getting really badly injured by blast, or indeed those that have already been injured in the Afghan and Iraq campaigns, how to make them live, how to enable them to live full and fruitful lives despite their injuries. There is some truly awe-inspiring work happening across the sector.
Well, I'm not going to gainsay any of that, of course, but I'm sorry to press you on this point. Not many people can understand why there is a single ex-military personnel living on the streets when By my calculation, there is £500 million in reserve in the bank accounts of military charities. You could put them all up in the Brighton Pavilion for that. You could build a Brighton Pavilion for all of them for that. How much have you got? How much have you got in the bank, Alex?
I don't know the numbers at the moment. I know that the Poppy Appeal this year is trying to raise £50 million, but that wouldn't be to squander and hold in bank accounts. That is because there is truly impactful work happening across the network. And I think it is important. It is important that we do continue to ask the public to dig into their pockets and help this community. There's 6.7 million people in the armed forces community across the country, and as you pointed out, yes, there are issues. But the issue, the environment and the situation is a lot more complex than we can possibly get down in this conversation.
Well, maybe, but I'm trying, and I'm one of those that gives. So a lot of people give. They give millions every year. You don't know the numbers, but I do, a very large amount of money in the bank. I'm asking you why you don't set up a task force, you're good at them, to rescue every ex-serviceman and some women living on the streets of Britain in this cold November.
I mean, I can't answer that one for you, George. That's something that our operations team might be able to answer. But I do know that we are providing a huge amount of funding to really great initiatives such as Stole Housing, amongst other things out there, and other. Of course, we're harmonising with all the other charities. SAFA, Help the Heroes, the Veterans Gateway scheme is a great way that we're bringing all these charities together to help solve that one problem. That, you know, if there is a single Tommy Atkins out there on the street that is homeless, the power of all these charities is now quite rightly being funneled to make sure that he is getting the help that he needs. If we can't help him, we will point him in the direction of someone that can.
Well, Alex, do me a favour, get someone from the operations that does know the numbers to give me a call and accept my gratitude for you calling, because we really did want to speak to the British Legion tonight, and I'm grateful to you for being that person. Alex Owen, Head of Armed Forces Engagement at the Royal British Legion. Now, let me go back to the board. I read Chris. I read Ryan. Let me read Jem, I think it is. The wars we haven't had saved many lives. Very profound, that one. I have to think about that. And here's one from Anonymous, I'm afraid. Good evening, George. Regarding the poppy, I will not wear a red poppy whilst our government continues to bomb innocent people and provide weapons to rogue states. I think the white poppy should replace the red as a people's protest against the war machine. Peace is needed, not war. From Flower Power, and she adds, free Assange. DJ Raw Deal says, I wear the white poppy to thank those who fought for our freedom and expression of anti-war, anti-imperialism with mainstream activism. Makes me feel nauseated. I feel I should wear a white poppy for the reason I just mentioned. I'm nauseated by endless wars. Now, I'm told that there's a full switchboard, so we'll take a caller before we get to the break. We don't normally get many calls in on the first hour because there's usually too much talk. I usually make a fairly lengthy monologue, which I will do in the second and third hours. Bob Justice says, I won't wear a poppy and haven't for a few years. Had a great chat with a veteran last year in the supermarket of all places, resplendent with his medals. Poppy wearers were passing him by. Let's just say he was less than impressed with the political class and the media. Here's Andrew in Burton upon Trent. Go ahead, Andrew.
Good evening, George.
Good evening, sir.
I have to just ring, as an ex-serviceman myself, a Royal Marine, the British Legion, initially when I came back from Sierra Leone and developed PTSD and everything else, were quite supportive by, they give you a credit card with £500 to do some shopping.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I got from the British Legion. I never got any help regarding housing or anything else like that. And I think enough is enough. We cannot, unfortunately, go on with this poppy appeal for people that serve the country not receiving any help. Loads of my friends are in prison. Loads of my friends are in mental health turmoil with no support, breakdown of marriages, loss of relationships with your children, anxiety, and suicide, and nobody's doing a thing about it. And it's about time we focused on the people that are still alive alongside the people that gave their lives, but we must please focus on the people that are still alive. Let's make their lives better. It would be great for this country to appreciate the soldiers that have kept this country great for so long, and the soldiers that will again protect this country if it really needs to be protected. Not fighting phony wars anymore, not fighting for politicians, but the soldiers will be there if this country needs them, but you've got to look after them.
Well, I think that's very powerful indeed. The more powerful coming from you as a former Royal Marine, Andrew in Burton upon Trent. Thank you very much indeed for that call. If you want to have your say, 0344 499 1000. Now, I've got to, in a way, correct, at least address some of the points that have been made on the board and on the calls. The people who fell, were injured, were scarred in the Iraq War, were not fighting for our freedom. They were not fighting for our country to be great, whatever that means. They were fighting because a class of politicians, the primary of which will be in the forefront of the cenotaph remembrance on Sunday, Tony Blair, a class of politicians sold them a pack of lies. The Iraq War was a pack of lies. It wasn't a necessary war. In fact, you've got to go back to the Second World War to find a necessary war. Now, I know there are pacifists out there. I've never been a pacifist. I would have been first in the queue at the recruiting office in the Second World War. Indeed, if I'd been alive, I'd have been agitating to start the Second World War in Spain 3 years earlier, fighting Mussolini, fighting Hitler. I would have invaded Germany when they broke the terms of the agreements that they had made and seized the territory of other people, militarized the territory of other people, Anschlussed the territory of other people. So I'm no pacifist. And I believe that the Second World War was a necessary war. It had to be fought, should have been fought earlier. But the wars that came after it were not. When we sent people to kill Malayans, kill Kenyans, kill Yemenis, kill Iraqis, kill Libyans, kill Irish people, that was not for our defence. That was in defence of British imperial pretensions. And so, that's why I cannot wear a poppy now. If it was just to commemorate the fallen in the First World War and the Second World War, I would wear it. And in previous days, I did. But I cannot do so now when it is taken as, by inference, an endorsement of these wars in which our people were sent to kill or be killed. In the case of the Chilcot Inquiry Report, ill-clad, ill-armed, ill-prepared, on a war that was ill-conceived, which didn't have to be fought, and was, in any case, unlawful. I can't be a part of that. That's my point of view. I need to hear yours. 0344 499 1000, or email me through the website at talkradio.co.uk. Now, Jacob Ward says, great debate about Remembrance Day on Talk Radio tonight. Who was that last chap who phoned in? I agreed with lots of what he said. Christ, I'm old, adds Jacob Ward. It's been one long bloody war, Jacob. That's why. Let's hear from Fraser in Morecambe. Go ahead, Fraser.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a point about the Poppies. Well, my granddad, his brother died elder brother, was in Allenby's army. And they were all my dad's side of the family were from west coast of Scotland, Motherwell.
Yeah.
And they had a big dislike of two people. One, interestingly, was Winston Churchill. And the other one was...
He had a very bad First World War, I must say.
He did. And Asquith wasn't too popular on my dad's side of the family either. But the person he disliked the most was Field Marshal Haig. And my dad, actually, he served in the British Army. And he would give money to the poppy collectors when he saw them, but he would never wear a red poppy.
That was their point of view, was it, throughout, even though they'd fought?
Because Field Marshal Haig was the founder.
Of course he was, yeah. My grandfather wouldn't wear a poppy because he was Irish, but he fought in the anti-fascist war.
My dad's side of the family as well,
but he fought in the anti-fascist war under Montgomery, all the way from El Alamein to Monte Cassino, and would have done so again, but he wouldn't wear a poppy because of its connotations in Ireland. We can't hold the crimes of Errol Haig against the Royal British Legion today, and I want to say something more about them. Let me just say, stay on the line, Fraser. Here's a text about Haig. To add to what John Wight said so eloquently about class and war, it's worth considering Earl Haig, whose name is honoured in the centre of the red poppy. Haig was the reckless and incompetent commander-in-chief of the British forces during World War I, who sent wave after wave after wave of working-class men running into machine-gun fire and certain death with no strategic benefit. Just as was then, our class is completely expendable to the rulers, who continue to be honoured and celebrated for their faux bravery while sacrificing our people for their own rapacious ends. That's from Samson in Kilmarnock, Fraser. It's absolutely true that Haig was a total disaster as a military commander. And why is his name in the centre of the poppy?
They used to call him, my dad's side of the family used to call him the Butcher.
Yeah, but he cared not. He was sending these men into the maw, into the mouth of the machine guns, completely careless about them. He was a disastrous military commander. The First World War was a crime. It was a crime against our own people by our own rulers. But I want to make this point, Fraser, while you're on. It would be unfair if this became a debate about the inadequacies of military charities.
But George, there are alternatives. I mean, you don't have to wear the poppy. You can still give the charity money, as I do.
And I do, even though I've got misgivings about doing so, based on the arguments I've been making earlier. I still do. 20 quid I gave this year. Last year I gave 40 quid, actually, but I only had 20 with me when I did it this year. But there are alternatives, you're right. But the government, Fraser, the state should be looking after the service personnel that are on the street and in the jails and in the hospitals with mental health problems. Why is that being left to people rattling cans?
I couldn't even begin to explain that problem. I mean, I was told that the majority of people who are homeless in London, a good proportion of them are ex-British forces.
An astounding proportion of them are. As I say, I met one this week and befriended him this week. Bought him a dinner, actually. And John Wight befriended one who was on earlier in the same week. So they're not hard to find. If the Royal British Legion or any of the others want to find them, I'll take them. I'll take them down onto the street and help them find them. but they're not hard to find. Fraser in Morecambe, thanks very much for an exceptional call and for bringing up the subject of Earl Haig, because that's very, very important. Now, this is the University of the Airwaves, but in this university, you get to talk back to the tutor. You can school the tutor. Why don't you call me? 0344 499 1000. Give me your point of view. If it disagrees with me, then, of course, your call will not just be taken, but it will be prioritised. Ditto your emails and your texts and your tweets, for that matter, at George Galloway at Talk Radio. Another day, another Johnson resigns from Theresa May's ill-fated government. He takes the opposite point of view of his brother on the matter. Boris Johnson resigned from the government because he could not support Theresa May's proposal known as the Chequers proposal for a deal with the European Union. So is Joe Johnson, though he supports remaining in the European Union and calls for a second referendum on the matter as a means of escape from the logjam we now appear to be in. Boris Johnson wants to leave the European Union, if necessary, without a deal at all, and opposes the idea of a second referendum. Both represent substantial sections of the British Conservative Party, which clings to power in Britain on the votes of the Democratic Unionist Party. And Theresa May's been playing drafts whilst the European Union has been playing chess. And they have checkmated her on the issue of the Irish border. So much so that the DUP has declared that they will vote down. Bear in mind, they are the difference between winning and losing every day for the Conservative government of Theresa May. They will vote down the plan that she appears on the brink of reaching with the European Union. And if I was a Member of Parliament, I'd be in the lobby with them. Even though I support Brexit, even though I was a campaigner for Brexit, what Theresa May has brought back from the worst British diplomatic negotiation in all of our long and checkered history is not Brexit at all. In fact, it is considerably worse than remaining in the European Union. And it's a very difficult thing for me to say that. So if I were a Member of Parliament, I'd be voting down Theresa May's deal with the European Union because, as Joe Johnson, the departing Transport Minister, has said, the deal that's been done leaves us as a vassal state of the European Union. All pain, no gain. None of the gains of leaving the European Union will have been achieved, but all of the pain that can be imagined will continue to be inflicted. We will be rule takers forever if we agree to this deal, and we will not have a seat at the table with the rule makers. This, my dear listeners, is a vassal state. It's a subordinate of a multi-state collection which will continue to influence and dominate the most important things in our life, in our economy, on our borders, continue to dominate them, whilst we haven't even the benefit of sending the rather feeble detachment we send to the European Parliament and the even more feeble detachment we send to the Council of Ministers. It is completely unacceptable to me as a supporter of Brexit that we remain in the EU customs union and thus effectively in the European Union single market. That should come as no surprise to you, because I fought the single market. I fought Maastricht and Lisbon and Nice in Parliament and out of it under the leadership of Tony Benn, Dennis Skinner, and many other outstanding left-wing Labour MPs. So don't tell me that what I'm saying is somehow right-wing. This was the orthodoxy of the left-wing in Britain until remarkably recently. I'm against the single market. I'm against the Maastricht arrangements. I'm against the customs union, therefore. And I will never accept that the 17.4 million people who voted in the referendum to leave the EU should effectively end up underneath the EU. This is not even the Norway option that is being offered to us. It's so far below the Norway option, we could crawl under the Norway option wearing one of Jacob Rees-Moggs's top hats. This is a disaster, up with which we should not put. Now let me turn to the Labour Party. The only way now that Theresa May can get her Brexit deal through Parliament is if a sufficient number of Labour MPs betray their party and vote to save Theresa May's bacon. That's the only way. There are enough Tories who will, like me, say no to the Brexit deal. And then you add the 10 from the Democratic Unionist Party. That means she has no majority. In fact, she's probably 60 or 70 votes short of a majority. Therefore, the only way she can be saved is if a corresponding number of Labour MPs prefer to keep her in power. Which would be a paradox, wouldn't it? Because that FBPE crowd that I block on sight on Twitter have been blaming Jeremy Corbyn for Brexit ever since this began. And the MPs most closely associated with the FBPE crowd, the People's Vote crowd, the Waitrose walkers, the hush puppy, soft shoe shufflers, are the people most likely to vote with Theresa May on her Brexit deal. Go figure, as the Americans say. And we'll be talking about the midterm elections in the United States. Some people say, what's that got to do with us? Well, I'm sorry to tell you, but the United States is a very powerful and important influence in our lives, in our country, in the events unfolding across the world. It's true that the exact particularities of the US healthcare system are a matter for them alone. It's true that the decision on who can enter or not enter the United States is a decision for them alone. I hold to that even if I hate the decisions they make. That's a matter of self-determination, and the Americans won that a long time ago by force of arms. But what the Americans do in the world is of vital, preeminent importance to us. And therefore, whether Donald Trump survives, stumbles on, is strengthened, is more likely to be re-elected in 2020, which is just round the corner, I promise you. I know how fast the years go by. It's a very great moment to us. And therefore, I can say this, that Donald Trump won the midterm elections. He won them because he didn't lose them. He didn't lose the Senate. He increased his power in the Senate. He didn't lose the House of Representatives by nearly enough. Nothing like the extent, only a third of the extent to which Barack Obama lost his midterm elections in 2010, and he went on to win in 2012. Nothing like as much. Donald Trump won because the places he campaigned in, the Republican Party won. The Democrats lost because the places that Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton campaigned in, the Democrats lost. Donald Trump won because his primary critics within his own party lost, and his primary supporters inside his own party won. Donald Trump won those elections. And the Republican Party has got a leader. You may think, as I do, that he is a monstrosity, but he is a leader. The Democrats have no leader. In fact, the Democratic Party is led by the same crew that rigged the primary system so that Bernie Sanders could not be the Democratic Party candidate against Trump in the elections in 2016. Nancy Pelosi, anyone? I don't know how old she is now, but I know that she's been there too long. I know that the triangulating Clinton mentality still holds the Democratic Party in a death grip. A death grip. I know that they will stop Bernie Sanders being the candidate in 2020. And if Trump is really lucky, they'll try and foist Hillary Clinton on the party again. And I'm here to tell you that in a presidential poll between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, Trump wins again. Trump wins again because he represents a huge section of the flyover country in the United States, the kind of Americans you never see because they don't have a passport. They aren't on CNN. They don't live in the great cities of the East Coast and the West Coast of the United States. You look down on them, literally and metaphorically, as you fly from New York to Los Angeles, as if you've any sense. You will if you visit the United States. But every one of those people down there have votes. And Trump knows the way to goal. He knows that you don't need to win the popular vote in the United States. You only need to win the states that put together a majority in the Electoral College for you. So we've got Trump for another 6 years. God help us. Because if the current rampage across the international scene of Donald J. Trump continues, heaven knows where we'll be if we're here at all at the end of his term. He has trashed the Paris Climate Change Accords. He has trashed his relations with the countries of Europe. He is bullying, browbeating, bribing countries like Germany to stop buying gas from their preferred customer, which is Russia, or supplier rather, which is Russia, in order to buy his liquid petroleum gas. He's demanding that we pony up double our defense expenditure, or else. He's threatening war with Iran. He's launched mass starvation against Iran. He's occupying an Arab country, Syria. He's backing Netanyahu on every madcap scheme on which he embarks. He's threatening to invade Venezuela. It's not off the table, he says, that the American Marines will wade ashore on the beaches of Venezuela. He's backing the proto-fascist government, which has just come to power in Brazil. He's recruited Colombia into NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. He is embarked upon the rise of the right-wing banana republics in Latin America. He's just forced Nicaragua to allow a U.S. base in Nicaragua, controlled by Daniel Ortega, the head of the Sandinista Liberation Front. He's at trade war with China, which might become a hot war as American warships steam through the South China Sea. The clue, dear listener, being in the name. We could be at war with China, with Russia, with Iran, with Venezuela. Brazil might invade Venezuela at Trump's behest. Colombia might invade Venezuela at Trump's behest. God knows where we'll be. Who do I blame? Well, I blame the Democrats. I blame the U.S. Democrats. It is precisely their abandonment, like New Labour before them, their abandonment of the people that they're supposed to represent in favour of their now very generous benefactors in the military-industrial complex, in the corporations, amongst the deep states. Do you know that almost 100 Democrat candidates this week were either ex-military officers or ex-CIA or other deep state intelligence operatives? Nearly 100 in what used to be the blue-collar Democratic Party of Labour in the United States. I blame the Democrats for paving the way to all of these wars. I blame the Democrats for paving the way to the drone culture, the missile culture that Donald Trump has now grasped with both hands. So I'm saying Trump is here to stay. We'll have to work out how we deal with it. And I'm here to say Theresa May has got to go. And moreover, she's on her way out the door. We're talking about Donald Trump and the midterm elections. Shortly I'll have Dr. Tom Packer, fellow in politics at Durham University, on that very subject. And we're talking about the resignation of Joe Johnson and what it means for the possibility of the British government failing to get its Brexit proposals through the House of Commons. Never mind the House of Lords. Let's move now to Dr. Tom Packer, fellow in politics, Durham University. Dr. Tom, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, George.
Now, I said in my remarks a few moments ago, Donald Trump won those elections. Do you agree with that? And if not, why not? If so, why?
I broadly disagree with it. Like, if you lose, if you have about 6% movement in the popular vote against you, and you lose the House of Representatives, I don't think you can be said to be won. Where I agree is he could have lost by more, and so some of the results were pleasing to him, but that was chiefly in the Senate. And the thing about the Senate is lots of very Republican states, which for complicated and historic reasons, have Democratic senators were up. So it's a bit like holding an election in Surrey and the Tories win and saying it's a good election for the Tories. It doesn't necessarily mean that much for the broad picture. Could have been worse, but I don't think it was a great night for Donald Trump.
I didn't say it was a great night. I said he won, and I'll tell you why I think he won. He won these Senate elections. He now has a comfortable majority in the Senate. When he had senators like the late John McCain and Lindsey Graham, for example, he was never sure that he could have a majority at all in the Senate. Now he can, by one means or another. McCain has shuffled off the mortal coil. Others were defeated. He now has a more pro-Trump Senate Republican
Party. He
does.
That is true, and it is very important because it ratifies both his judges, which is probably about the main agenda the Republican Party has at the moment, is to appoint sympathetic judges who are very powerful in the American system. And also, it may give him a bit more latitude, perhaps particularly some of the changes, to appoint people he wants to executive office. But having said that, I wouldn't call it a safe majority. It's declining as we speak. It looks like the Republicans are probably going to lose Arizona. They only gained about 2 seats. And if you just repeated the results, comparing them with nationally, he would win by he would lose the Senate next time.
In fact, tell me about that. Arizona's recounting or still counting?
Arizona is still counting. The Republican was ahead. Now the Democrats are ahead. It's probably mostly from Democratic areas, so she'll probably stay ahead. But it's not certain. I think there's about 100,000 votes still to go.
And there may, in fact, have to be a new election in Florida. Tell us about that.
Yes. Well, we'll see what happens in Florida. I doubt there'll have to be a new election, probably. But there's a huge controversy about the most democratic county where they're taking ages to count the vote. They've clearly been incompetent about counting it. And there's some talk the Republicans might from the Republicans, they're claiming they might be deliberately miscounting the vote. We'll see. And
in Georgia, where a black woman was the Democratic Party candidate, she refused to concede. There are all kinds of reports of shenanigans on election day there, and indeed in voter suppression in the state of Georgia in the run-up to the election. Tell us what the state of play there is, please.
I would say the state of play there is Georgia. Almost certainly Kemp, the Republican, has won. I see why Abrams, the Democrat, is waiting. You never know. Votes might turn up, but she's well behind. And it's worth noting, even if she gets what she wants, that would just trigger a runoff. Because in Georgia, you have to get over half the vote in order to win outright. Otherwise, you have a runoff between her and him. And he might well win that anyway. I suspect he's going to be elected. I wouldn't put too much stock in voter suppression. There's always lots of talk of voter suppression and voter fraud in American politics. Nowadays, it rarely comes to that much.
Well, you say that, Doctor, but a referenda, a plebiscite was held in Florida on the same day, which returned voting rights to felons.
Yes, that is true. Convicted criminals who aren't in jail, precisely.
Which is 1 million people, most of them black.
That's true, but as you can imagine, former convicted criminals aren't the people who vote the most. So it's unlikely to make that big a difference to the vote. As a general rule, ex-criminals tend to have very low voting records. And they won't all be Democrats either. So it'll only affect Florida.
There are some criminals that are Republican, that's for sure. But the stunning thing for me was that this figure of 1 million is 40% of all the black men in the state of Florida. So 40% of all black men in Florida are felons.
I'd be interested in looking up it, but that does sound about right, yes. It is a very high number. America's a very large prison population, and it's very disproportionately African American.
Now, moving on, Tom, the second reason why I say that Trump won, that he did lose the House of Representatives, but not catastrophically, not nearly as badly as Barack Obama, for example, lost the House of Representatives during his first term.
I think that's legitimate. So certainly where I would agree is I don't think this election means President Trump can't win re-election. That I definitely agree on. Having said that, they lost the popular votes to the House of Representatives, I think slightly more than the Democrats did in 2010. It's certainly comparable. Well, the difference is the electoral map's a bit more favourable to the Republicans now than it was for the Democrats then. So I would call it a solid defeat, not the kind of defeat that can't be reversed, and it's not inconceivable the Republicans could win back the House in 2 years' time. But it's a big defeat, and it's going to make it like at least a challenge to win back the House. They have to do pretty well next time to win the House back. And the House has been the big stronghold of the Republican Party for the last 8 years in American politics. So it's a real blow.
Now, a third reason why I make the case I do is that the Democratic Party, I know the Republicans are divided too, but less so now because some of the main critics of Trump have gone. The Democratic Party is not really one party. I mentioned earlier, almost 100 of their candidates were military officers and ex-CIA and other security agency operatives. At the same time, they've got self-confessed, if that's the word, professed is better, socialists elected in Michigan and in New York. They have people who are Bernie Sanders Democrats, and they've got people who are really not very much different from moderate Republicans.
Yes, so I'd say nowadays there's even quite a fair amount of difference between moderate Democrats and moderate Republicans. But yeah, I broadly agree with what you've just said. And also the nature of the US system is when you're in opposition, you don't really have a leader. The nearest thing they'll have as a leader for the next 2 years is Nancy Pelosi, because she's going to be Speaker of the House of Representatives. And it's the only Democrat.
That's my fourth reason.
Right?
That's my fourth reason. I mean, any party which has Nancy Pelosi as a leader is a party that is unled.
I kind of disagree. I think she's a very formidable lady, most successful lady in US political history to date. And if you look under Obama, she was responsible for an enormous amount of the policies he passed in the first 2 years. She's quite old, but she's a very tough cookie. But seriously, there will be a lot of fights among the Democrats, just like the worst for the Republicans before 2016. And they definitely can't think they've got the presidency guaranteed, and it could easily be catastrophic for them. But the fact is, the Republicans were incredibly disunited, had a very unusual and in some ways weak candidate last time, and they still won. And the Democrats can win as well. This election shows they've got plenty to play for. They've got every chance of winning next time, also a chance of losing. And when they have a nominee, then the Democrats will have a leader. But that's going to be over a year away.
Yeah, over a year away. But let's look forward to it, Doctor. Who is likely? Who are the runners and riders? Beto O'Rourke in Texas was said to be presidential, but he didn't win. Bernie Sanders is very old.
He's the best the Democrats have done in Texas for decades.
Yes. And he dragged a lot in with his coattails.
He's running as a losing Senate candidate. No one succeeded in that, going from that to president since Abraham Lincoln. There are a lot of very serious candidates. Kamala Harris, half African-American, senator for California. She, I think, people would agree, is a good shot. Cory Booker, African-American senator for New Jersey. I think Joe Biden, if he runs, should be taken seriously as a potential nominee. Michael Bloomberg, the billionaire's running. He would be a relatively moderate candidate. It could be any of them. It could be a fair number of other people as well. There are a lot. It's very, very open race this time.
You didn't mention Bernie.
Bernie, I think, has a decent shot. I thought he was a very good shot after the last time. He's not doing very well in polls for someone who's very well known. He's about third or fourth in the polls at the moment. So I think he has a decent shot of winning, but I would put him less than most of those people. Because just if you were the runner-up last time, you should be really high in the polls. And he's quite low at the moment. And I think a lot of Democrats will have seen that candidates his group endorsed, not one of them defeated an incumbent Republican. And that might resurrect some of the worries he's not electable. But yeah, he's got a shot as well. At least he's run before. That's a big advantage.
Speaking of which, if Trump is praying tonight, I don't know if he does, he'll be praying that they pick Hillary again, won't he?
Yes, I think that would be fair. I think the chances she'll run are very low. The chances she'll win, I think, are pretty low if she did win, as in win the Democratic nomination. I think she would be very good news for Trump. And let's not forget, he only won last time in large part because she was so unpopular. If they had a slightly stronger Democratic candidate, he would have lost. So he might face an even weaker candidate next time, but decent chance he'll face a stronger one. So he'll have to do better to win again.
And finally, Doctor, let me read 4 short tweets to you, if I may. People listening to us are responding. Tony X says Trump losing the House is actually a victory for his style of politics because people generally don't know how the system works. He can blame any domestic problems on the House whilst continuing
Of course, politics in many ways is about achieving things, even if Donald Trump isn't in it for that. So I think it's a huge blow for Conservatives and the Republican Party, but I certainly agree that in some ways Trump does his best to rally against authority. So the House might be the kind of enemy.
They'll be the whipping boy, won't they?
Having said that, if they dig up something really nasty or scandal, he may regret them winning for personal reasons as well.
Now, Manic Mo says, I don't think he'll be up against Hillary in 2020. I have a funny feeling he'll be up against Michelle Obama. I just wish if people wanted a woman in power so much, they'd have voted for Dr. Jill Stein.
I agree with the former. I disagree with the latter, just because I think she has absolutely no interest in running. I think if she ran, she might have a decent shot, actually. Barack Obama's very popular with Democrats. But I just think all the evidence is she doesn't like politics much. She hates being super high profile. She won't want to run for president.
Would you say the same about Oprah Winfrey?
Now, Oprah Winfrey is a bit more interesting. You might call her the Donald Trump of the left, the bigger celebrity. I think she'd be a pretty formidable candidate, though what one has to remember is one forgets this because of Trump. People who enter politics not having done it before, even when they're very capable, often screw up big time early on. So I think she'd be a serious candidate, but she wouldn't be guaranteed.
Dr. Tom Packer, thank you very much indeed for your time, valuable time, and you've been very helpful indeed. Dr. Tom Packer is a fellow in politics at Durham University. Where do you stand? 0344 499 1000. You can email me through the website at talkradio.co.uk. You can text me, text the word talk, followed by your message to 87222. But that'll cost you 25 pence plus normal sending charges. You can tweet me for free at George Galloway at Talk Radio. Phil Nielsen says, did you know that the Republicans and Trump lost states, Michigan, Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, that made him president in the U.S. congressional elections last Tuesday? True, Clinton was a flawed candidate. And Lizzie the Legend says, I know you think Trump was right to withdraw the CNN press privileges, but it's like censorship anywhere. Now others are going to be culled. It isn't, Lizzie. CNN didn't lose their right to be at the press conferences. It was that named individual who did. If I'd been the president of the United States, I'd have thrown Jim Acosta out too. He's not throwing CNN out. That would indeed be censorship. David Leviscont says, your guest talking about the US election missed out on an important part, the Department of Justice. This is a massive plus. He does not need the House. Let me take a break for some capitalist messages. I need your calls on Poppies, on Remembrance Day, on the First World War, on War and Peace. 0344 499 1000. I need your calls on the US midterm elections. I need your calls on the resignation of Joe Johnson. Who knew there were two blonde Johnson boys in the House of Commons? And in the week that China put up the first artificial intelligence television presenter, robot. It wasn't AI. It was a robot. He was actually a robot. He was made of plastic, and he read the news. Who would you like to take my place? What kind of robot do you think could do that? Let's hear from Darren in Leeds. Go ahead, Darren.
Hi, George.
Hi.
Your last guest on, I don't mean to be offensive to him, but I think you got him from CNN because he mentioned about these polls where it has Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, and all these candidates are definitely disliked by not only the Republicans and independents.
He is a prominent academic and definitely not from CNN, I can assure you.
However, because the polls, what he's referencing, a number of them are particular in who they poll. So they're polling the older voters and the voters who vote straight down Democrat, so the Clinton-type voters. And, of course, they'll go for Joe Biden or Kamala Harris.
Well, I think if Trump was praying for Hillary Clinton and he didn't get it, God didn't answer that call, his next prayer would be for Joe Biden, wouldn't it?
Yeah, oh, definitely. It'd be as if he's running against Obama and you can use all what happened in Obama. But I was also going to call about Florida because he mentioned about that one county and there's a whole kerfuffle because Florida's got a long history of election malpractice.
Oh, don't we know it? Yeah. That's what gave us George W. Bush.
And now there's a big argument about the governor's race and a congressional race down there, because the county is called Broward County, and previously a Bernie Sanders type candidate ran for Congress this year as an independent, but previously in 2016 as a Democrat.
Yeah.
And he actually went to court and got proof that the Broward County supervisor was deliberately getting rid of ballots illegally. However, she didn't lose her position, and now the Republicans are crying out now because they think that their races are going to get flipped. But it's a long history of both parties, I think.
Well, look at the statistic I gave, for example. I'll repeat it because it almost sounds unbelievable. It turns out that 40% of all the black men in the state of Florida are convicted felons and therefore had no right to vote. We know that because it's just been restored to them, and 1 million black men have just been added to the electoral register in Florida. Did the Democrats do anything about that? No. They didn't campaign for it to be reopened as an issue. They spoke nothing about it. Nothing about the voter suppression in Georgia. Nothing about the chaos of American elections that were still counting. And in fact, there's one place where I think 84,000 ballots still remains to be counted. And as you'll know if you're on my Patreon page, because I discussed it. No, it's on Sputnik on Saturday, tomorrow, with Adam Gary. A pimp who had been found dead in a brothel was elected in the state of Nevada. He was elected. He's dead. He was found dead in his own brothel, but he was elected. And now the seat goes to his party. But that kind of, as a metaphor, kind of sums up the American political class to me.
I totally agree with you on that. And could I just recommend some guests for you, if that's possible?
Yeah, of course.
Tim Canova, who was the congressional candidate who I mentioned, who used to be a Democrat, a Bernie Sanders type, I'd say, and he was crushed by the party.
He ran as a third-party candidate this time, didn't he?
Yeah. And it happened again, and that's where all the kerfuffle is now.
Yeah.
There's some dodgy stuff going on down in that election processing. Tim Black, an independent media type figure, and Nico House. But also, if it's possible, the only three candidates who I think have a chance of beating Trump, but the Democrats won't pick them, is Bernie Sanders, as you've already mentioned, Tulsi Gabbard from Hawaii, and Nina Turner from Ohio.
Excellent. Well, thanks for that, Darren. You can be my stand-in who needs artificial intelligence. Thanks for the tips. I appreciate it. Doc Moonshine says, our brave soldiers are just pawns in a game of human chess to these suits and ties. Take Backdoor Bob, for example. Hereford Council didn't have time to look at his case. These are people, not pieces, to be thrown back in their box when they are broken. And Tyler Durden says, fraudsters everywhere. Patriotic charities for ex-soldiers have tens of millions in the banks, while so many ex-soldiers sleep on the streets. Leftist revolutionaries of the RMT investing tens of millions in capitalist banks and tobacco companies. Well, I'm not sure what they would do with their money if they didn't invest it, Tyler, and we're not sure about their investment portfolio anyway. And nobody is suggesting that any of the charities mentioned here this evening are in any way fraudulent. I've got a part of the balance sheet here of the Royal British Legion, just to give you an idea of the scale of it. The Poppy appeal in 2017 brought in £49.2 million. Donations, legacies and events brought in £46.8 million. Lotteries and trading brought in £21.7 million. Fees charged to care home residents brought in £16.6 million. Grants received for welfare services and Remembrance brought in £13.1 million. Membership subscriptions brought in £5.2 million. Investment income brought in £6 million and £600,000 of other income. These are the Royal British Legion's own annual report and accounts. You can find them online yourself. So the British Legion alone had an income of £159.2 million just last year. 0344 499 1000. That's the number to call. And if anyone from the RMT wants to defend their share portfolio, they're more than welcome to do so. Christopher, I think it's Tomina. Christopher Tomina says, nothing unites Conservatives more than judges. Since the House is gone and the Congress is split, judges will be the Senate's main focus, and it will help unite the party. Actually, I think one of the remaining Liberal judges on the High Court, a very old lady of 85, has had a fall at home and broken her ribs. We hope, of course, as we do for any old lady, that she makes a full recovery. But if she doesn't, that will be yet another high Supreme Court nomination that Donald Trump will be able to make and to get through. Denny says, shame these hypocrites hadn't paid more attention to the returning troops in 1918. Now those heroes have long gone, but that hypocrisy is worse than ever. Don't forget our men in the trenches were promised a land fit for heroes in 1918. Didn't quite work out that way. Tony X says, to be perfectly frank, Trump has no need of any political institution. He is literally making it up as he goes along. That's true. He's exposed the fragility of the US Constitution perfectly. And much as I loathe the man, fair play to him. And Philza, my friend in Ireland, said, missed the first 30 minutes of the show. We all have watched and heard Trump in the last few days. The way he refused to answer the questions, not once but twice, was more like a dictator. Please say something sarcastic yet wise, as you always do. Well, you see, Trump, if I'd got further with Dr. Tom, my fifth reason why I say Trump won the elections would have been this. The entire media was against Trump and for the Democrats. And you saw the result that they managed to achieve. Now, Trump handles these press conferences, makes these statements, takes to Twitter, precisely because he's going over the heads of a press corps of what he calls a fake news industry, and I call it a fake news industry. He goes over their heads. Anyway, John in Glasgow's got a point of view on Earl Haig. Let's hear it. John, welcome.
Hi, George.
Hi.
I'm calling to caution against the conventional wisdom nowadays that seems to portray Field Marshal Douglas Haig as a kind of demonize him as a pantomime villain to do with the First World War. That's, to my mind, revisionist history, which is grossly unfair, I think, to the man and his family, because the men who fought under him...
He didn't really have a family. He was a bachelor.
Well, I think he has descendants, but because I think there is still an Earl Haig. But the men who survived these wars saw their comrades killed. They thought he was a hero. He had basically a state funeral 10 years after this war. And you would have thought if it was the case that he was the demon and the villain.
Well, Margaret Thatcher had a state funeral. It doesn't, because you get a state funeral doesn't mean that people like you.
Well, I know, but he had lying estate in London, lying estate in Edinburgh. Huge crowds lined the streets. Not only soldiers, but civilian people of that generation. And I have to say, I never heard, and my grandfather fought in the First World War, and anybody of that generation had a bad word to say about the man when they were still alive.
Well, I'm a bit surprised to hear that, John. Let me put it to you this way. Hundreds of thousands of our men were sent over the top into the machine guns, gaining nothing, in what turned out to be some of the worst planned and executed battle plans under his stewardship of any in British martial history.
But the peers and the people who lived at that time would have known that as well. And on the opposite side, I would say, George, Paul von Hindenburg, President of Germany, was elected President of Germany, who was Haig's opposite number, in 1925. He wasn't only elected once in 1925, he was re-elected in 1932, and he was doing the same thing on the German side to what not only Field Marshal Haig, but hundreds of generals, because there probably was hundreds of generals. He was a man doing the bidding of the political class and the monarchies of the time. And most of the soldiers who came back from that war regarded him as their greatest advocate and friend.
Okay, thanks very much, John. You provided balance on that subject, and that's what we're all about on this show, fair and balanced. 0344 499 1000. Let me know if you have a point of view on Earl Haig, if you think he was the hero that John in Glasgow did. I myself do not. Christina says John Wight indicated clearly the insincerity and hypocrisy of Remembrance Day, how soldiers are used and abused in wars. Veterans deserve better than a poppy. We have veterans suffering without help and dying on our streets in the UK. Tony says, I thought the point of Armistice Day was that we never forget, and more importantly, never send our sons and daughters to die in foreign lands to kill people they have no argument with, to serve the interests of the Prophet. And that's Prophet, Profit. And Mal in Belfast says, after the 100 years anniversary of the poet William Wilfred Owen's death, it's apt that we should ponder his words in the poem Mental Cases. These are men whose minds the dead have ravished. Memory fingers in their hair of murders, multitudinous murders they once witnessed. Very powerful words indeed, a very powerful poem. And Lizzie the Legend says, George, please give a moment of talk radio airtime to Britain's best supermarket on their bold new stance raising awareness of man's mistreatment of the orangutan to yield palm oil. I've never been prouder to be anyone's employee than I am to work for Iceland right now. Well, that's a very powerful point. I myself kind of agree with it. I'm now an Iceland man. Now call me, or it's Tamar, as I usually say around about this time. If you get your calls in, we'll be listening to you. If you don't, you'll be listening to me and Tamar having a chat, not least about the fact that he, as an Arab, is wearing a poppy, which I found surprising, and I'd like to have a word with him about that. We'll be talking about the artificial intelligence, whether it's not AI. He keeps interrupting me. It's not AI. It's robots. It's even worse. Now, could a robot present this program? Well, could Tamar present this program? Could anyone present this program like I present it? But if they did, if they were a robot, what would they be like? Joe Johnson resigned from the government. Who knew there was another Johnson lurking in the corridors of power? But he's gone now, and he's gone with quite a blast at Theresa May as he leaves her behind. He was the transport minister. As his train pulls out of the station, he's left her without a name. And as the DUP have now withdrawn their support, I don't think they're paying the money back. If the DUP vote against her too, then there's a very real possibility that the deal will not go through the House of Commons. We'll be discussing it at more length in the next week or two, because the vote in the Commons will be on the 27th of November. But you may have a point of view on today's resignation. Let's see Thomas in Worthing's on the line. Thomas, what would you like to talk about?
Good evening, Joe Johnson. I'm a Brexiteer. I have been for many, many years, way before the referendum took place. And I've seen a lot of Brexiteers praising him for kind of standing on his morals today and resigning. I don't buy it. The guy co-authored the Conservative Party manifesto, which stated that the government, whatever government would be, would abide by the result of any referendum. And you have, numerous pledges across both sides of the referendum campaign: single market, customs union, departure if we vote leave. And he's turned around and effectively said, nope, not buying that, I'm not going for that. And he's resigned only from the cabinet now and demanded a second referendum. Now, as much as I dislike UKIP, Mark Reckless, Douglas Carswell, they resigned from the Conservative Party, joined UKIP, and called a by-election. You've got Zach Goldsmith, who resigned out of principle over the Heathrow third runway, and he called a by-election. Why aren't these MPs doing the same?
Well, I mean, to be fair to Johnson, he was in a situation of collective responsibility. It's perfectly possible to be a minister in a government whilst disagreeing with some of the policies of that government. There would be no politics in the country if everyone in the government agreed 100% on everything. But he does have, and did have until today, the collective responsibility to project the government's line. It's because he can no longer do so that he's left the government. And it's a big blow to Theresa May. She now has lost another minister, another Johnson, at the same time as losing the Democratic Unionist Party. Do you agree with me that the deal now cannot possibly command a majority?
The deal that she's negotiating, if what I've read about it and staying, parts of the United Kingdom staying in the customs union is accurate.
Well, it's all of us staying in the customs union for a period of time, but the backstop, as it's called, being that if we withdraw from the customs union, which we would have to do if we genuinely were Brexiting, then the north of Ireland would remain in it.
It's utterly ludicrous. She's pledged numerous times that this would not happen. I actually think it's about time she resigned and there was another leadership election called in the Conservative Party. And that's coming for the record. That's coming from somebody that's never voted for the Conservative Party in his life.
Well, there's no time for any of that. There's no time for a second referendum. There's no time for a leadership contest. We're leaving in March, and we either leave with a deal or we leave without a deal. But leave we must. We are leaving the European Union in March, which is only 4 months away.
I think I'm right in saying that Donald Tusk has actually already offered Theresa May the Canada plus terms. I would suggest that actually accepting that as a baseline and then amending that would be a very good plan, because that would keep Northern Ireland out of the customs union. I just think right now, and I've had this impression since the very beginning of these negotiations, to be honest, Theresa May is trying to make a name for herself, and she'll quite happily sell out the country to build a name for herself. And what needs to happen, and for the record, I'm not a fan of Jacob Rees-Mogg or Boris Johnson or any of the senior Brexiteers in the Conservative Party. But having said that, I'm not a big fan of any of the Remainers in the Conservative Party. Somebody sensible needs to come in. They need to bring in voices from the business world and negotiate a business-like, orderly Brexit that works for everybody. And as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't matter if Theresa May is there from now until the referendum departure, the Brexit departure. It's a waste of time. She's not going to get anything that she wants, and she's not going to get anything that Parliament wants either. So, I mean, if she stays or goes, I don't think it really matters. I think getting a new person to lead the Conservative Party and at least bring some semblance of order to the process and stop these leaks to the national press as well.
OK, Thomas, thanks very much for that sterling call. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Lots of people are writing. Ryan says the Tories claim to be patriotic, tough on crime, the party of fiscal responsibility. Yet 13,000 homeless veterans, most of them with mental illnesses, 20,000 reduced police officers, and the trebling of national debt says different. And Lenny in Norwich says, I will never wear a poppy whilst British soldiers who murdered innocent people on the island of Ireland remain there. My grandfathers fought for Irish freedom as promised by the British in 2 wars, still awaiting our freedom. And Samson again in Kilmarnock says, did I do this already? No, I didn't. To add to what John Wight said so eloquently about class and war, it's worth considering Earl Haig, whose name is honoured in the centre of the red poppy. I did indeed do that one. That should have been deleted. My apologies. Christina says, I agree with George Galloway. A war in the defence of Britain is quite different from wars fought to enable Britain to dominate and control other countries, countries that had made no attack on Britain, wars that were illegal and killed so many innocent people. And Labour, I can't read the name. This is the problem with this system. Labour will end austerity con. Hashtag GTTO. These hashtags are beginning to annoy me. Wars are always about the interests of the 1%, whilst the 99% make the ultimate sacrifice. Forgive me for not getting your name right first time. David Leviscont says, yes, all wars since the Second World War have been a pack of propaganda and lies. Just look at the propaganda mainstream media control and the lies following the questionable event of 9/11. And Lucy Diamond says, sending love and support to Stewartson _Bill, who is struggling. His son died in Iraq. For what? Why didn't we listen to David Kelly? Well, Lucy, you were the first to know that I'm making a film called Killing Kelly on the death of Dr. David Kelly. The crowdfunding on Kickstarter.com should be up now, actually, if you go and look for it. Go to Kickstarter.com and see if you can help me make this film. David says, hi, Gigi, those who sent people to fight war had to lead on the front line. I wonder how many wars we would have. It's easy to give orders. Must make them feel godly. Let's hear from Chris, who is a Brexiteer and is in Colchester. Go ahead, Chris.
Hiya. Hi, George.
Hi.
Yeah, just one quick thing about the wars. I do get fed up with mainly World War II being used as propaganda to start new wars. Like every time we've got a new enemy, they're Hitler.
A new Hitler, yes.
Yeah, and our leaders either Chamberlain or Churchill, depending on what decision they make, and it gets very tiresome. But regarding the US, with the Democrats, they just don't have any policies, and their only policy is the opposite of what Trump says or does. And
yeah, it's all about Trump for them.
Yeah, and
he likes that, of course, Chris.
Pardon?
He likes that, of course.
Of course he does.
He is a supreme narcissist.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant for him. But with the Democrats, so they're so obsessed with identity politics. I think they're going to put Cory Booker up, and I actually saw on the Jimmy Dore show. I know you had him on before.
We had Jimmy on, yeah.
He did a piece about Cory Booker because he supported a bill that was for criminalising boycotting Israel. So, I'm sure the Democrats will like him. But that's the kind of thing they'll do, is they'll put someone up, a black guy or a woman, and they'll say, they lost because of their gender or their race. And
well, they've kind of tried that with Hillary, but their obsession with identity politics is reaching new heights. One of their candidates, successful, was not just a former Air Force jet warplane fighter, but was a martial arts expert and a lesbian, vegan. And they trumpeted all of these things as a reason to vote for her. Now, I might have voted for her myself. She might be superb. But I'm certainly not going to vote for her because of her martial arts expertise, her sexual orientation, what she eats for her dinner, still less that she used to bomb people from Air Force jets in the U.S. Air Force. Chris,
It's gotta
thanks.
be policy.
Yeah, of course.
Can I just, George?
Yeah.
Did you hear about Tucker Carlson?
I heard that his house had been attacked by demonstrators.
By Antifa, who said, "We know where you sleep," while his wife was the only person in the house, and she hid in the pantry.
It's very bad. It's very, very bad.
I'm worried.
Why did they pick on him? Because he's the only TV host that's against wars.
Yeah, I know. They're the only person in the US, but I worry where the US is going. If Trump wins again in 2020, I don't know what will happen.
It's very dangerous. I've been saying for the last 2 years, there's civil war potential in the United States. If this Mueller thing if they try to actually oust Trump over Mueller, the 40% of the US, most of whom have got guns, who support him, will take to the streets. And then we'll be in an actual civil war in the United States, a country with thousands of thermonuclear weapons. It's very frightening indeed. Chris in Colchester, thanks for that call. An excellent one. Let's take a quick break. Now, who knew that the legend Lizzie worked for Iceland? Who knew that Iceland would be the new sliced bread? Who knew that Iceland would emerge as an environmental hero? And whatever fool banned their advert has guaranteed endless discussion about the banned advert, which is as good as an advert without having to pay for it. Ditto the fact that I'm speaking about it now. I say, let's all go to Iceland because they care about the orangutans. Other shops are available. But I'm now going to Iceland. Mrs. Galloway has just informed me that the Kickstarter.com is not yet active, but will be in the next hours. So go to it, please. Look for George Galloway's name. Look for Killing Kelly. Let me do a few messages. DJ Raw Deal. Theresa May upbeat Brexit deal propaganda is to dampen no deal and bad deal fears. Remember Cameron's lies when he claimed he'd got a good deal. Boris Johnson saw that for the bull that it was. I suspect Joe Johnson has seen May's lies and is acting to weaken her. And the Communicipalist, my old correspondent and friend, says it's my view that Theresa May's Chequers Agreement was set up to fail by the EU and UK negotiators. It is part of their psychological campaign that is ubiquitous in the corporate media to make no deal our punishment for exercising our democratic rights. Let's hear from John in Camden. Go ahead, John.
Good evening, George. How are you, mate? You all
I'm
right?
good. Always worth hearing from you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I did want to speak about the spike in knife crime, but the girl said that we're doing that another time.
Another time, yeah.
Yeah, but what I want to say is about the midterms with Trump. I think that it's a win-win situation for him because he can now abandon the day-to-day politics, which he finds tiresome and is bored with it, and just go on the campaign trail for 2 years.
I think that's right, yeah. And he'll use the House of Representatives as his whipping boy. He needs a straight man, doesn't he?
Exactly. To say, I'd give you my 90. You could have your 90-foot wall if it wasn't for those pesky Democrats shooting down all my bills. And it's a win-win situation for him. And as you said, that we've got him for another 6 years because I don't think that the Democrats have got anybody who has got a political enough clout.
Well, you heard the donkey derby that Dr. Tom put before us as the potential presidential nominees. I mean, to call it a donkey derby is to do a disservice to donkeys. And the only one of them with a national profile, with a project, with a program, is Sanders, albeit that he's getting on some.
I mean, Bernie's, what is he now, George? 73, 74?
Oh, no, he's much more. No, he's
is he really?
He's nearer 78, I think. Maybe Tamar can get me the exact number, but I think he's about 78. He's older than Trump.
Yeah, well, yeah. a lot older. But the names are coming up. Elizabeth Warren, Bill de Blasio. I mean, really? There isn't anybody. I mean, what the Democrats need is a Bobby Kennedy, and they haven't got one.
No, they certainly don't, no. I mean, Tom spoke highly of Nancy Pelosi, but he's the only person, literally the only person I have ever heard do so.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I remember you saying that you reacted with both confusion and mirth when you heard that the former Tea Time talk show host, Miss Winfrey, was gonna stand. Well,
she might be their best bet, you know, John, on the basis that they've got nobody else that everybody knows.
Yeah, I mean and isn't this now an awful reflection on America?
Of course it is.
You've got two people that aren't politicians,
two celebrity television hosts fighting it out for the leadership of the so-called free world. You couldn't make it up, John.
But as you say, that she, for her national profile, people for a person that people have heard of, then yeah. But to get Democrat senators, Democrat congressmen, I mean, people were talking with a straight face about Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York City. He's not even popular in New York. It's as I say.
Well, they have to abandon this idea that you put somebody up because of what colour they are, what sexual orientation they are, what they eat for their dinner. That is the ultimate of identity politics, a vortex into which the US Democrats have very definitely disappeared, in my opinion. John, thanks as always for a tremendous call. John says, George, like your father, my father served in the Desert Campaign as a tank driver during WW2, World War II, and later landed on Sword Beach in the D-Day operation. He was in the King's Royal Irish Hussars, / 7th Armoured Division. He only wore the red poppy of the Poppy Appeal, never the poppy that bore the surname of Haig. And Jane A. says, we forget these soldiers have had the same trauma as many in Civvy Street, but in the military they see horrendous situations, adding more trauma, yet we expect them to come home the same. And Bye Blighty, what a wonderful name, says, if Joe Johnson thinks Brexit is the biggest crisis since World War II, then maybe Britain should do what we did back then and get together with the Russians and the Americans to defeat any European foes to create a socialist Britain. Daniel is in Addleston, always worth hearing. Daniel, welcome.
Good evening, George. How are you?
I'm good, sir. Thanks very much. Go ahead.
In regards to the poppy, I mean, it's hard, isn't it? Because what is we're told they fought and died for, and what is now being used in their name.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important to remember this same government will sell out the military with European Union military unification.
I see. We're getting an EU army after all, even though they told us we were making it up during the referendum campaign.
Macron was just mentioning it this week, that they've got to do it to get away from the Americans. They can't rely on the Americans.
Well, I agree with the first part of that. The main lesson, I should have said this when John was on the line from Camden, the main lesson is to stop depending on America, to stop regarding America as our leader, as our father.
Will we get dragged into everything then?
Well, that's exactly it.
No, one thing I wanted to say, George, I know because of your time, but, I rate Max Kaiser. I think he's a genius and a legend. I really do, and Stacey Herbert for putting up with him. But at the same time, this blockchain, now, again, it blows my mind how we can know 13,000 people ex-service sleep on the streets. Does someone go round and count them? So I'm wondering whether to put the 2 and 2 together. I mean, it's just in my head. I mean, it's a bit dangerous, I know. But, to the idea of setting up a charity on the blockchain, in regards to these veterans.
Well,
They just
I don't know anything about that.
No,
what I do know is that they were counted.
Could you ask him?
Yeah,
There you go, 'cause I can't ring him.
Well, no,
Could
he's
you
in
ask
America
him?
now. He lives in America now.
Yeah, I know
Max.
that.
He may be running for office in North Carolina too. Daniel, thanks for that.
Thank you, George. Thank you.
Thank you, mate. I can't help you on that. What I can help you with, though, is that, yes, somebody did count them. It's a personal choice which poppy to wear, but I'll be wearing the white poppy, says Midnight Owl, another great name. And Scouse Alarma, old pal, says, we currently have a robot as Prime Minister. I must say she is a bit clunky. Ryan says, sorry to inform you, but there are already many robots presenting the news here in the UK, most of which are at our certain national broadcaster, of which we have to pay a licence fee for its polluting propaganda. And Simon Bartle says, I don't relish the thought of an automaton version of George Galloway hosting the Moats on talk radio on Friday nights. I'm more than happy with the real McCoy. Simon, that's the nicest thing anybody said to me all night. And Georgie says, it's frightening the way people vote for Trump. I agree with your New Labour analogy and that the Democrats are to blame. I hate the way real Donald Trump and some of the media dehumanise groups of the people and justify targeting them with military might. Now, Grayson is on the line from Caterham. Go ahead, Grayson.
Good evening, George.
Nice to hear from you.
Yeah, thanks very much. And I generally agree a lot with what you say about Iraq and Afghanistan and Tony Blair, and the British Army should be about defending us, not actually attacking and being involved in attacks on other countries. But I wanted to take issue with you a couple of things John Wight said about the British ruling class. Because one thing in the First World War that is very different is that the British ruling class, at least the aristocracy, were heavily involved.
That's true.
In the fighting.
That's true. A lot of officers lost their lives. A lot.
Absolutely, including Asquith's son, his only son. He was killed. Now, that's complete difference from today, where all the politicians send everybody else's kids into war.
Or Donald Trump, who got 8 deferments because he had bad ankles, which he's miraculously recovered from on the golf course.
Exactly. So I think that's one thing we have to say. Is
that's true. That's true. Although, of course, the field marshals, the Haigs and the rest were not at the front, were not on the front line.
Well, I don't think they could be. I mean, the thing I think also, to be fair, about the British generalship, everybody in the First World War, every army actually grappled with this huge problem of having war on a completely different dimension.
They should have thought of that before they declared it.
I completely agree, and I personally also think the First World War was a terrible and tragic mistake. Yes, and we should never have followed Europe down the rabbit hole. And that was Earl Grey and the Liberal Party who went there.
Yeah, liberal imperialism.
Yeah,
it's the same today.
Absolutely. But the other thing, George, I wanted also just to pick up on the Second World War, because you said about you would have been involved, like got out there in Spain and whatever. I mean, I think we need to take a step back. That's a kind of retrospective, yes. But at the time, yes, at the time what we were faced with, the Spanish Civil War was a civil war. Yeah, the Anschluss with Austria was basically about one German population uniting with the Greater Reich. It was actually, confirmed in a referendum. The Sudetenland was German and wanted to be reunited with the Reich. And I remember a few years ago, about maybe 30 years ago, Donald Cameron Watt, in a book called How War Came, wrote a very impertinent chapter which was entitled "Would You Die for Danzig?" yes, and Danzig was 95% German, yes. And the only reason, really, I think, the main reason why Britain went to war in September 1939 was because Hitler had broken the promise over the Czechoslovakia. You know, he'd occupied the rest of Czech.
No, we let him off with that. We came back with a piece of paper declaring peace in our time over that. We went to war over Poland.
Yeah, we went to war over Poland, but as I said, the Germans had basically said, we want Danzig, and Danzig was 95% German.
Yeah,
yes?
but that's not... Look, Grayson, let's go back to square one. First of all, it's absolutely acknowledged by both John Wight and myself that the punitive terms of the Treaty of Versailles at the end of the First World War, compounding the criminality of the war itself, laid the basis for the Second World War in some of the places that you talk of. But... first of all, the Spanish Civil War was not a civil war. It was a war in which the fascists were allied with Hitler and Mussolini, whose air forces were doing the bombing for the Franco-fascists. It was only regarded as a civil war, a domestic affair, by the so-called Western democracies, who not only stayed out of it, but placed an arms embargo on weapons to the legitimate, recognized government of Spain. That's why people like me, you're quite wrong to say it was retrospective, people like me, people of whom I would have been one with, in 1936 were demanding that the so-called Western democracies enter the war in Spain to defeat Hitler and Mussolini, who had entered the war. And it was only in the absence of those governments doing that the international brigades of ordinary workers and intellectuals, leftists and socialists and communists and progressives of all kinds, joined the international brigades and tried to defend freedom and legitimacy in Spain. Secondly, Hitler just took all these places and everybody else and everything else too. He didn't just go for Danzig. He took half of Poland. He didn't just go for the Sudetenland. He took all of Czechoslovakia. And that's how we got to the monstrosity of Hitler dancing on the Trocadero in Paris and all of Western Europe lying under his jackboot. Grayson, it's been great to talk to you. Well, do you want to come back quickly?
Yeah, very quickly. I mean, the Spanish Civil War started in July 1936, and it was basically, and at that point in time, Mussolini and Hitler were not involved. I mean, that war started with a revolt by the military, which took over most of the part of Western Spain.
It was fully coordinated with Hitler and Mussolini.
I don't think so, George. Honestly, I don't. But never mind. It's great to talk to you anyway.
You're a gentleman. Thank you, Grayson. Always good to hear from you. You've still got time to call me 0344 499 1000. Or you can write to me as Hassan Diwan has. How about devolving EU membership to the home nations? England and Wales can stay out. Scotland and Northern Ireland can stay in. And Mark in Lowestoft says, George, during the First World War, many of the commanding officers, like John French, Douglas Haig, and John J. Pershing, were cavalry officers and retained the mentality of such officers. They knew that cavalry was obsolete by the time of the Crimean War. The charge of the Light Brigade, those pesky Russians again, proved that, although we now get people telling us that Crimea has nothing to do with Russia, even though we fought Russia in the Crimean War over, clue was in the name, Crimea, proved that as did the American Civil War. Yet this lot thought the breakthrough would be obtained by cavalry charges and bayonet charges up against machine guns, barbed wire and trenches. It beggars belief. They should all have been sectioned to a secure hospital for the mentally deranged. They even took more horse feed than they did ammunition. As they say, you couldn't make it up. All the best from Mark in Lowestoft. That is the best SMS of the night. And Hassan says, most Trump supporters do not own guns. gun ownership is very concentrated in the US. Just 3% of American adults own a collective 133 million firearms. Well, it seems to me that a very, very, very large number of people in America own guns. And my hunch is that a very, very, very large number of them support Donald Trump. I wouldn't like to test that, Hassan, would you? Andrew says most of the calls tonight have been of high quality, which only serve to raise the level of debate. It's like being at university. Well, I never attended university, so I couldn't say firsthand, but I do regard this as a university, and a very high quality one, a red brick university, a Russell Group university. Very, very highly intellectually powered. But I did start my life working as a factory worker in Michelin tyres in Dundee, making the ZX Radial, which we were very, very proud of. It was good work, unionised work, well-paid work, 3-shift industrial work, that you felt proud of going to your work. You felt proud of what you were making. You'd look at cars as they went by and see the tyres that you made on these motor cars. We had 3 factories at that time. One was in Dundee, in which I worked. The other was in Stoke. The third was in Ballymena, in the north of Ireland. Ballymena closed, and then Stoke closed. And now they want to close Michelin in Dundee. I am campaigning against it because it means industrial death in a city that was once one of the workshops of the world. Now look, I will squeeze as many calls as I can in the remaining 15 minutes before I head up to Manchester to see one of my boys playing football. He's a protege, by the way. You'll be hearing much, much more about him. Lots of clubs sniffing around him already. And don't forget, I'm in Nottingham on the 8th of December at the Savoy. But I wanted to have a quick word with Tamer Asfahani, just to prove he's not a robot. Still less is he artificial intelligence. Still less is he a spook, or what was it someone said, a fly on the fruit. I never quite understood that one. But Tamer, you are wearing a poppy.
I am.
And I happen to know, as the name suggests, that you are in fact ethnically Arab.
I am.
Tell me quickly, why are you wearing a poppy?
So for me, the Ottoman Empire was obviously a big deal for us in the Middle East for over 500 years. Initially it was great, but unfortunately, like most empires do, their end got quite oppressive. And it wasn't until the Middle Eastern states at the time, not the countries that we know them as now, made a pact with the British and the French and the Allied forces that they would help with the war effort if they came in and helped them defeat the Ottoman Empire. So
a promise which was, of course, broken.
It was, but that doesn't mean that the people that fought the war for us didn't uphold their end of the deal. So I wear the poppy in remembrance of those that fell to help us liberate the Middle East from the Ottoman Empire.
Even though it wasn't liberated.
But that's not the problem of the soldiers that fought in the war.
That's a fair point, yeah.
That's a fair point. I'm not politicising it.
Do you think, just in parenthesis, that Lawrence was lying, Lawrence of Arabia was lying to the Arabs, or were the rulers lying to him?
I think there was a bit of both. I mean, I don't really trust... from what I've read quite a lot around Lawrence of Arabia, there's some good stuff and there's some bad stuff. But equally, you're talking about a very tribal time, especially, in the Khalij where he was, which is, the current Saudi Arabia. So there was a lot of corruption with tribal problems there at the time.
He did stay in a hotel in Aleppo because his laundry list is framed and on the wall if it's still standing.
Yeah,
and I've
most of Aleppo's fallen by now.
Unfortunately, That's really helpful, Tamer.
Yeah.
It's your explanation. It's not for me to say that it's good or it's bad. In fact, if we believe in anything, we've got to believe in people's freedom to wear or not wear these kind of symbols. Thanks very much indeed for joining us and for all your work on the show tonight. It's been a great show. Let's take a call from Sarah Payne in Cambridge. Sarah, welcome.
Oh, good evening, George.
Good evening.
Good to hear you.
And you.
Yes, I would just want to start with this anecdote. I was in Dersingham, near Sandringham in Norfolk the other day, and there was a service with flags and banners in the local church, and we asked what was going on, and it was in memory of the regiment, the Sandringham Regiment, I think, who had been at Gallipoli in the First World War, and apparently not one of them, not a single man, came back from Gallipoli.
It was a total disaster, the whole Dardanelles adventure, which was Churchill's idea, by the way, and it was a complete disaster. And people talk about the tremendous sacrifice, and it was tremendous sacrifice of our own people, of the Australians and the New Zealanders, the Anzac brigades. But as a matter of fact, most of the British troops that were killed at Gallipoli were Commonwealth soldiers from India, what is now India, Pakistan, and other countries.
But it was this, I found out in detail, it was this local regiment completely wiped out.
Completely.
And so I would say I won't wear a poppy specifically because of the hypocrisy which has been talked about on the show of the politicians. And when I see the politicians sitting in the House of Commons wearing the poppy, the hypocrisy of these men, where only 13 of them voted against the bombing of Libya in 2011. They supported the bombing of Yugoslavia in 1999, a sovereign state without UN. It's just...
Hypocrisy is their middle name, Sarah.
It just makes me sick, George, absolutely sick. But at the same time, my heart goes out to the widows, the families left behind of all those men who were slaughtered in the war.
Well, 1991 was a big year. It was the first invasion of Iraq. Then there was the Yugoslav war later in the decade. I opposed them all. Sarah, a wonderful call. Yeah.
Can I just say one more thing?
Yes.
But what's behind all this? Let's not mince our words. War is money. And who funded the Nazi war machine that you talked about, or a colleague of yours talked about earlier? It was the British and American banks, and ditto with the First World War. So the bankers were involved in this because, as I say, war is money.
You'll always find a banker involved. Sarah, thanks.
Well,
I need to press on.
That's an important point.
Yes, thank you very much for making it. The legend that is Norma. No show is complete. Norma, welcome.
I do enjoy your show. I mean, it's not really enjoyable, but it's very interesting. No, what Sarah just said, war is money, is true, because I was a bit shocked to hear about this Invictus Games that's been sponsored by an arms manufacturer.
Arms companies are amongst the sponsors of the Invictus Games,
But I mean, call me cynical, but, you know, more fighting, use these weapons, will be more profit for the manufacturers, but the poor maimed soldiers, I mean, they'll go on.
Well, to be fair, they're giving money for these Invictus Games, which is helping the people who have been gravely damaged in the wars. I suppose you could say, to a very small extent, no doubt, it's some kind of reparation.
Yeah, it may well be, but on the other hand, let's not call me too cynical. I think it's shame on them in a way, because the more fighting, the more using their weapons.
Yes, I'll agree with that, of course, but it's not the arms companies that declare the wars, it's the politicians. And it's not the charities that cause the carnage amongst the men and now women in the armed forces. It's the political class. And we mustn't allow, blame to be shifted. The guns are not to blame, it's the people using the guns, ordering the guns to be used. Yeah, of course they make them. Capitalism will make anything. It'll make a machine that you can strap to your face to help you breathe, if you like. Norma, thanks for the call.
Listen,
go on.
John White's article on Remembrance Sunday, where can I read it? Do you know?
He said so earlier
he didn't make it very clear. I didn't really understand
it. It's on his site. Tell you what to do. Are you on Twitter, Norma?
Yep.
Follow him on Twitter.
John White.
John White 1.
John White 1. Okay.
WIGHT. Callum in Cardiff. He's up next. Go ahead, Callum. Callum, we lost him. Oh, what a pity. Now, Charlie says, George, Charlie Faye Colross. Great show again. So Labour has never won an election without Scotland. How is Corbyn going to win any future election? Off your knees, gorgeous. Vote for an independent Scotland. Unify Ireland and free the Welsh. Charlie, let me tell you, I've never been on my knees, mate. Never, ever, ever been on my knees. And I take great exception to what you've just said. Here's Diana in Cheltenham. Go ahead, Diana.
Good evening, George.
Good evening.
I'm a long-time listener and a long-time admirer of you.
Thank you so much. Isn't it a very high-quality show tonight?
It's been very moving.
Yeah.
There's been one or two funny parts, but not many.
Yeah.
But my dad was born in 1920 in South Wales in a mining family.
Okay.
And he fought in the Second World War. His father was an associate of Keir Hardie, who I think was one of the first Labour MPs.
He was the first.
And my dad said that apparently there were soldiers lining when Keir Hardie was elected, there were soldiers lining the road because they thought it was going to be a revolution. And my dad told me that when he was a boy in the Depression, he can remember being on Newport railway station and he saw these poor men who had no legs, no arms, some of them were blind, begging. That's why
this was the land fit for heroes.
That was what my dad always said, and that's why he was a socialist. He was a great admirer of Howard Wilson, who was a great Labour leader. I know he wasn't really a socialist, but that's why
I became late in his life a close friend of Harold Wilson, and my parents thought the sun shone from Harold Wilson, I must say.
He kept the Labour Party
but
together.
the landscape, the political, industrial, social landscape that our people came back from that terrible war to, you've only got to watch the Downton Abbey and other sanitised accounts of it to see the misery and poverty and servitude
that's why I'm
our
a socialist
people
as well.
came back. Diana, a wonderful call. Wonderful call. Thank you. And the last call, I think, of the evening is from Gus in Glasgow. Go ahead, Gus.
Yes, a pleasure again, George.
Thank you.
The most thing I would like to say was, I think me and you agree on not wearing the poppy, but the thing I like people to do is, instead of buying a poppy, putting it to a children's charity.
Well, I do think that we have a total responsibility to the damaged survivors of the wars that we send people into, whether we agree with those wars or not. I would say that the state has that responsibility and should be exercising it, but has actually farmed it off to the charities. And therefore, that's why I gave my 20 quid for a poppy I didn't take, because I wouldn't want it to be the case that I didn't step up and do my little bit for that cause. I've got questions about how the money's being used, how much of it is being kept in reserve and in bank accounts and so on. So I've got no problem about fundraising for the survivors of the war, the maintenance of war graves, the maintenance of remembrance monuments and all the other things that the British Legion does, and of course housing for ex-service personnel. But somebody's got to step up their game, Gus, because if you've got 13,000 servicemen on the streets in the cold, if you've got 4,500 in the prisons, lives broken, if you've got the level of mental illness that is suffered by ex-service personnel, we don't want to paint the wrong picture. Most of our armed forces come back and adjust perfectly well to civilian life, but a significant number of people do not. And if you're going to send people into these illegal wars, the least you can do is look after them when they come back. Last word to you, Gus.
Yes, you're saying there's too many people getting brainwashed, and another one of our points is people need to think before actually joining the army and what you're getting into.
Well, I think people have been thinking tonight here on the mother of all talk shows. I'm grateful to you for your call. I'm sorry to Lizzie, the legend, and Callum that we didn't get to them, and to everyone else who tried to get through, everyone else who wrote and couldn't hear their missive read out. I did my best. I thought it was one of the better shows on the mother of all talk shows. It's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you, and if it was, come back next week at the same time in the same place and bring another listener with you. That's the best inoculation against the closure of the mother of all talk shows, if it's a rip-roaring success. I'm off to Manchester. I'm in Nottingham on the 8th of December at the Savoy. Don't forget my Killing Kelly film on Kickstarter.com. It's been marvellous. Thanks for joining me.